Okay, how do antidepressants work? So I'm going to be talking about SSRIs. So SSRIs include Prozac, Zoloft, and Paxil, and they stand for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So first I'm going to explain how brain cells or neurons work. So the way that neurons work is that they communicate with each other. And through their communication, they make connections which basically allow for certain activities to be done. So the way that neurons communicate with each other is just like humans talk to each other, neurons talk to each other, but it's not in the same way. So when I'm talking to you, the way I'm talking to you is I'm saying words, and you're receiving those words, and you're understanding them and utilizing that understanding. So with neurons, instead of giving over words, they give over chemicals to talk to each other. So when we're talking about something like mood or appetite or sleep, which are all negatively affected in depressed patients, there are certain neurons that have to give over chemicals to other neurons to make the connections that govern these processes possible, right? But the problem is that when a neuron gives over chemicals and talks to another neuron, the way that it works is that the first neuron puts the chemicals that it wants to give over inside a certain gap called the synapse, and then the next chemical, the one that's receiving the next neuron, the one that's receiving the chemicals, kind of pick up the chemicals from that synapse and utilize them. The only issue is that there's also these things called transporters that kind of clean out these synapses. So after the first neuron puts the chemicals that it wants to give over in the synapse, transporters kind of clean out these synapses and also take some of these chemicals away. So if not for the transporters, all of the chemicals that the first neuron gives over to the second neuron are going to be received by the second neuron. But because transporters take away some of them, only some of the chemicals that the first neuron wants to give over are actually received by the second neuron. So when we're talking about depression and we're talking about serotonin, in certain neurons that make connections that involve mood and appetite and sleep, which I said before are negatively affected in depression, the serotonin that's necessary to maintain these connections isn't being given over because transporters in the synapses are kind of stealing some of the serotonin that's needed to form these connections. So what SSRIs do is basically they disable some proteins that code for these transporters, so these transporters are now disabled and not in the picture, so much more of the serotonin, and serotonin is one of these chemicals, much more of the serotonin in this case is going to be actually received by the next neuron, because it's not going to be stolen by the transporter. So now there's going to be more serotonin to maintain these types of connections and make sure that appetite, sleep, and mood are going to be governed properly.